as we talk about diverting resources, slowly the West declines and collapses in 476 AD. So the Visigoths sack Rome in 410 AD. And in 476 AD, the last Western emperor is deposed, marking the end of the Western Roman Empire. High-level question, what is the reason for that decline and the collapse of the Western Roman Empire? So nonstop civil wars, as we've talked about, weak emperors. There's a economic money crisis, so shrinking tax base, rising army costs. There was a loss of key provinces, especially in North Africa, reliance on contracted barbarian troops as they immigrated more and more into the Western Roman Empire, cascading invasions, migrations, amplified by Hun pressure, and then the East-West split. The richer East survives, the West can't stabilize under that split.
The crux of the matter is that barbarian armies, so armies from outside the empire, put increasing pressure on it during the 5th century. And for whatever reason, when the Roman state failed to sort of suppress one of them and, say, settled them here or allowed them to have here, or couldn't stop them and they took over a province like the Vandals did in North Africa, this created this kind of vicious cycle because then the Roman state lost access to the resources from those provinces, that is the taxes, and without those resources, they couldn't, maintain, mobilize, pay for their armies. Then they had fewer armies to handle the next wave of barbarians that came in. The previous barbarians who settled kind of declared their kind of independence. They also could not be put down. And so this created a vicious cycle that just continued in that way. It's not rocket science, actually. I mean, you can see it playing out. Yeah. Now, who these groups are, where they came from, why did they cross, those are different questions, right? But from the Roman standpoint, that's how it was experienced. These are armies that can defeat a Roman field army, right, in battle. And sometimes they do. And they then settle and take over territories, and then you lose the revenues, and so you can't recruit your own armies. And so, anyway, that's the kind of cycle. The East tried to help. Occasionally, they would send forces, but they were also subject to some of the same pressures. Because remember, the Goths cross the Danube for the first time in a major way in 376. Then you have the Battle of Adrianople a couple of years later, where like 1.5 field armies is just annihilated, and the Emperor Valens dies, and the Goths are just like kind of loose in the Balkans. And there was then a long war with them, 4 years. It results in a kind of truce where neither side wins, and the Romans for the first time accept the presence of this quasi-independent Gothic army in the territory of the empire. This is unprecedented, as I said, and it creates a lot of tensions and dysfunctions. Okay, so why does the East survive and the West does not, right? There's lots of reasons that we can give here, but one of them is a geography that we were talking about earlier. In other words, without a fleet, which they don't have, the Goths can't cross over from Thrace or the Western Balkans to Asia Minor and go plunder some of the more prosperous provinces. So they're stuck in the Balkans. They're gradually pushed kind of in toward the Western Balkans, which is like the worst part at the time, like you want to be in. And eventually they just decide, well, it's kind of nicer in Naples. And so they go to Italy, right? Just because there's just a lot more resources there for them. And that's one way that the East just kind of manages to, it doesn't do this deliberately, but the geography kind of pushes these invaders to the West.
So that's one. So geography is some of it's sort of the luck of geography and both of the invaders and the geography of the empire.
Yeah.
But, the East had a lot of invaders since.
Yes.
And was able to still barely at times
Yes.
survive the invaders. So, and some of that could be luck. Some of it could be about the nature of the invaders and the effectiveness of their military, all that kind of stuff.
By the way, it worked in the other direction too. So if you have like Persians or Arabs coming into Asia Minor from the east, they usually can't cross over into your Balkan provinces.
Right.
So you can fall back on one side or the other side. If you fortified Constantinople so that it's an impregnable bunker, which it was, right? So you're holding your command center in Constantinople. You can alternate between your European or your Asian provinces depending on where the trouble is. You can call in reinforcements from either side. So the East does have that kind of advantage. This is not the reason why it survives for as long as it does, though it is a reason. Also, they acquire flamethrowers at some point, which those help too.
Yeah.
Right? Ultimately, I think it's the decision made by local communities to stick with the Roman state. Like ultimately, like they're not going to actively side with invaders. And when the trouble passes, they restore ties with Constantinople immediately. Like this is their natural political home. And that's the question that I'm really trying to answer. Like, why does that happen?
We should say just like we've articulated multiple times that the Roman Empire survives. So it's not like the Roman Empire collapsed and another Byzantine Empire was born.
Yeah.
Really, there is a shift that happens, and part of that shift is because of Constantine. Right? It's not just about where the capital is, but I'm sure that there is just a general move towards that direction from the west to the east, and that in many ways, weak emperors and the west, the weak leaders. The structure of government, all these kinds of elements put together, maybe demographic shifts and declines that have to do with the fact that the center of the empire has moved.
That's right.
And so ultimately, it's not that the West Roman Empire collapsed. It is that the center of the Roman Empire shifted.
Yes.
And because of that, the historic West collapsed.
It's quite striking. So, for example, already by like in the 430s, Constantinople is basically codifying Roman law for the West. So Roman law in Latin is codified in Constantinople and then sent to the West as, oh, here's your law code. And this is in the 430s, so after the alleged division between the two, which, like I said, is kind of loose. It's not hard and fast. In the 6th century, it is the East that reconquers part of the West under Justinian.
Mm-hmm.
And not only that, he also recodifies Roman law on a much bigger scale. And then that law becomes Western law. So in a certain sense, Roman law as we know it comes from Constantinople. It doesn't come from ancient Rome. I mean, ultimately it comes from ancient Rome, but we don't have those versions of it. We have the East Roman versions of it. It is East Rome that reconquers Rome. This is a funny inversion, because Constantinople is situated in a province, Thrace, which always was sort of considered backwards, right? In the time of like the early Caesars, if you were in Rome and you thought, Thrace, it was like, that's like, some sort of armpit of the Roman Empire or something, But by Justinian's time, it's complete inversion. Like the capital of the Roman world, the heart of it is there, and Rome is this kind of backwater provincial city in Italy, that you've just liberated from the Goths, and it's kind of in ruins. There are wolves roaming the streets of the Forum. So this is a complete overhaul of the centers of power. It's turned inside out almost.